You wake in 2025 with your name stitched into every crate, believing the ocean still answers you and every port still bows to your rhythm. You call it protection, but it feels like locking the front door while leaving the back window open, smiling at the sound of your own key. Flags snap above the docks like hard prayers, and you promise your people warm jobs as if warmth can be ordered the way steel is. At first, the world laughs politely, like guests who heard the joke before. Then they stop clapping, and you notice the silence has weight. You raise new gates at the border, and the gates shine. But the hinges groan at night, and you pretend the groan is only wind. In boardrooms abroad, faces turn into closed umbrellas, and contracts fold quietly, the way letters do when they carry bad news. You tell yourself the lines will reroute, that ships will simply take new paths, yet the map begins to look like a bruise spreading. Friends become customers, customers become strangers, and strangers become judges. And you feel their eyes like cold coins on your tongue. Your allies start whispering inside corridors, not against you, you insist, but around you. Like water choosing a crack to escape. You see factories at home cheer for you, then glance at their calendars, realizing praise is free, but parts are not, and time charges interest. A single bolt goes missing, then a single chip, then a single container, and you learn how quickly soon can turn into never. You demand loyalty, and the world nods. Yet the nods feel rented, like suits borrowed for court, crisp on the outside, trembling inside. On screens, numbers flicker like anxious insects, and every tick sounds like a tiny verdict, telling you control is a story, not a fact. You start speaking louder, slower, sharper, believing volume can pin reality down, but reality slips away, oily as rain on asphalt. Meanwhile, new partnerships bloom without your signature, small at first, then thick as vines. Wrapping around roots you once called yours, you feel your own currency of trust thinning, like paper rubbed too often, and you notice how quickly respect turns into a negotiable fee. The ocean keeps moving, indifferent, while your policies sit like stones in your pockets, and you walk deeper, insisting you're still on shore. Banks and brokers smile in perfect teeth, offering you bridges made of promises, and you step onto them because the water below looks hungry. Every bridge asks for a toll you didn't plan to pay, not in money alone, but in dependence, and you taste the metal of that word. By night, you stare at the globe like a cracked mirror, and in the cracks, you see yourself aging, still commanding, still pleading, still alone. Morning briefings begin to feel like confessions, and you listen for reassurance. But every voice carries a pause where certainty used to live. You insist the pauses are strategy, yet they linger like bruises under makeup, visible only when the light turns honest and unforgiving. Across oceans, ledgers close with a soft sound, like eyelids shutting on a long day. And you realize sleep can also mean refusal. You measure loyalty by applause, not noticing how hands clap slower now, as if counting the cost of each small movement. Ships idle offshore, engines humming with impatience, burning fuel to stay still, and you recognize the expense of pretending nothing changed. You blame weather, calendars, rivals, anyone but the mirror, because mirrors have learned your face too well to flatter anymore. Supply lines stretch thin as nerves, vibrating with rumors, and you feel the tremor through your own spine each time a call goes unanswered. Your promises grow ceremonial, spoken like oaths at dusk, beautiful and heavy, sinking into air that refuses to carry them forward. A whisper spreads that alternatives exist, quieter routes, kinder terms, and the whisper terrifies you more than open rebellion ever could. You still command the largest room, yet chairs empty early, and the echoes mock you by repeating only the parts you want forgotten. Numbers arrive dressed as forecasts, but they behave like memories, resurfacing at night, demanding attention when you are most alone. You sign another order, the ink bleeding slightly, and you sense how paper absorbs resolve the way sand absorbs spilled water. Abroad, old partners smile gently, the way one smiles at a former lover, respectful, distant, already committed, to a different future. You feel the cost of delay accumulate like dust on unused machinery, invisible daily, undeniable once the engine refuses to turn. Advisors speak in careful tones, stepping around words like glass, and you notice how fear has learned to dress as politeness. Each decision narrows the hallway ahead, until options feel like doors painted on walls, convincing from afar, useless up close. You start waking before dawn, listening for messages that do not come, learning the weight of silence minute by minute. The markets you tried to discipline now study you instead, patient, curious, waiting for the moment you blink first. You feel dependence creeping in softly, offering help with conditions, like a hand that steadies you while quietly checking your pockets. By evening, you rehearse strength in empty rooms, and the words sound loyal, but they no longer sound like they belong to you. You begin to notice how often meetings end with phrases like, revisit later, a gentle way of saying decisions have slipped beyond your reach. The room smells faintly of paper and fatigue, and you realize authority once had a scent too. Sharper, cleaner, harder to ignore. Overseas headlines arrive folded, never shouted, their calm tone more frightening than anger, because calm suggests preparation, not panic. You tell yourself patience is power, yet patience now feels like waiting on a platform where the last train already left quietly. New tariffs stack like sandbags, heavy and hopeful, but the tide keeps rising, testing every seam you insisted would hold. You sense resentment at home turning inward, workers counting hours instead of slogans, wondering why pride cannot pay invoices. Your speeches repeat themselves, familiar as old songs, and you notice people mouthing the endings before you reach them. In distant capitals, calendars fill without you, dates circled in ink that dries fast, commitments forming in rooms you never enter. You feel the weight of isolation sharpen, not as loneliness, but as a narrowing echo, where only your own voice answers back. The world adapts faster than you expected, like water finding new channels, flowing smoothly once it no longer waits for you. You try to measure leverage, but every measure slips, because leverage depends on belief, and belief has begun to migrate. At night, you imagine supply chains as veins, and you feel the chill when some stop pulsing, leaving parts of you numb. Advisors bring charts, but their eyes betray the truth first, flicking away whenever you ask if control can still be reclaimed. You approve emergency fixes that feel like patches on an old coat, warm for a moment, then tearing wider with movement. Confidence drains subtly, like color from a photograph left too long in the sun, still recognizable, but undeniably fading. Rivals no longer challenge you directly. They simply build around you, constructing futures that do not require your consent. You sense debt where pride once stood, obligations stacking invisibly, each one promising relief while quietly narrowing choices. The phrase temporary measure becomes your favorite lullaby, soothing enough to sleep, dangerous enough to forget the fire. You realize strength is now something you must insist upon, not something others grant you without being asked. Standing alone after another long day, you admit, if only to yourself, that momentum has changed direction, and it did not ask permission. The language around you shifts subtly. Fewer absolutes, more conditions, and you feel how power now asks permission before it speaks. You remember when threats were enough, when silence followed your pauses, and you wonder when silence learned to answer back. Deals arrive pre-written, polite, and firm, leaving only narrow margins where your signature can still pretend to matter. You sense your urgency rising, but urgency makes others slower, careful not to be rushed into your remaining gravity. At home, optimism thins, stretched across headlines like cheap fabric, tearing easily when handled by ordinary days. You promise revival dates the way one promises recovery from illness, hopeful, vague, and increasingly hard to believe. The world prices your resolve quietly, assigning it a discount no speech can reverse once whispered into consensus. You feel your leverage drain in increments, never dramatic, always deniable, until the total loss arrives fully assembled. Meetings become exercises in translation, where your words are interpreted, softened, and sometimes gently ignored. You notice new centers of gravity forming, pulling roots, capital, and attention away from your outstretched hand. The policies meant to protect you now demand maintenance, constant and costly, like walls cracking under their own weight. You accept financing with smiles attached, each smile a reminder that help is rarely neutral and never free. Dependence settles in like furniture moved quietly overnight. Familiar by morning, unavoidable by noon. You still speak of sovereignty, but the word feels ceremonial, repeated for comfort rather than command. Abroad, confidence in you decays without announcement. Like infrastructure neglected until collapse feels sudden but earned. You realize resistance has become symbolic, gestures performed for cameras, while real negotiations happen elsewhere. The gap between intention and outcome widens, and you stand over it, insisting the distance is exaggerated. You hear laughter again. Softer this time, not mocking, just relieved to have found ways around you. Control no longer breaks, it dissolves, leaving you holding shapes that resemble authority but refuse to function. Alone with the night, you finally accept that dominance fades not when challenged, but when the world stops needing you. The tone of negotiations cools, no longer tense, simply procedural, and you sense how urgency dies when others stop fearing your absence. You hear phrases like market reality spoken gently, as if soothing a child, and you bristle at how final that gentleness feels. Old allies diversify their faith, spreading trust thin, not out of spite, but survival, and you recognize the logic too late. You announce new victories, smaller now, framed carefully, like souvenirs from a war everyone else stopped fighting. Factories reopen briefly for cameras, lights bright for an hour, then dim again when the lenses leave and silence returns. You feel the cost of reassurance rise, every promise needing more repetition, more volume, more spectacle to hold attention. Behind closed doors, financiers speak softly about exposure, measuring you the way one measures weather, not loyalty. You sense the balance tipping from command to request, and the difference feels like stepping down a stair you did not see. Domestic anger grows unfocused, searching for shape, and you stand between it and the world, absorbing blows from both sides. You tell yourself pressure proves importance, yet pressure now feels like erosion, constant, patient, and indifferent. International routes redraw themselves cleanly, elegant in their efficiency, and you admire them even as they exclude you. You accept compromises once unthinkable, labeling them tactical. Though each one narrows the story, you can still tell. Confidence used to arrive early to meetings. Now it shows up late, if at all, apologizing quietly before taking a seat. You watch influence migrate, like birds changing season, and you realize no wall can stop something that has learned to fly. The language of independence begins to echo, hollowed by repetition, meaningful once, now ceremonial noise. Your advisors suggest patience again, but patience has become indistinguishable from waiting to be replaced. You notice how often decisions are deferred past your term, past your reach, past the need to include you. Relief packages arrive wrapped as assistance, yet the strings are long, invisible, tightening only after acceptance. You feel dignity traded in small increments, each exchange reasonable alone, devastating when added together. In quiet moments, you understand that retreat does not look like defeat, but like relevance slowly forgetting your name. You notice how quickly emergencies become routine, how alarms fade into background noise once everyone learns to live with them. Your announcements shrink in ambition, careful now, designed to survive headlines rather than reshape the horizon. The world no longer reacts to your moves. It anticipates them, adjusting quietly before your words even land. You feel yourself negotiating with memories, not outcomes, arguing for a version of relevance that already passed. Domestic patience wears thin, stretched across months like a bridge never meant to hold this much waiting. You promise stability, but stability has learned to ask questions, and your answers arrive slower than doubt. Creditors speak in calm voices, offering flexibility, which you understand is another word for watching closely. Each concession is framed as temporary, yet the calendar fills with tomorrows that never quite arrive. You sense how dependence changes posture, how shoulders curve inward when help becomes habit. Foreign leaders meet you with courtesy, not urgency. And courtesy is a distance that cannot be crossed. You remember when uncertainty followed you, now you follow it, trying to keep pace with decisions made elsewhere. The language of confidence feels borrowed, rehearsed, slipping whenever reality interrupts the script. You accept oversight, disguised as partnership, telling yourself shared control is still control. Markets move on reflex, no longer pausing to read your intentions, and the speed leaves you breathless. You notice how often later replaces now, and how later quietly becomes never without ceremony. Pride survives, but it survives like an heirloom, admired, polished, and no longer useful for work. You sense the structure leaning, not collapsing, just enough that correction grows expensive and frightening. Every rescue tightens the net, each knot tied with gratitude, each knot harder to loosen than the last. You realize influence once traveled ahead of you, opening doors, while now it follows, asking permission. As the year closes, you understand collapse is not an event, but a posture you have slowly learned to accept. The headlines stop framing you as a force and begin treating you as context, a background condition others work around. You hear your policies referenced in past tense, gently, as if speaking of weather patterns that no longer threaten storms. Negotiations now open without waiting for your arrival, and you learn how rooms decide outcomes before chairs are filled. You speak of fairness, but fairness has shifted shape, defined by those still moving, not those insisting on stillness. Domestic markets move cautiously, sensing uncertainty not in numbers, but in your hesitation to choose a direction. Your statements travel slower than reactions, and by the time they land, the ground has already changed beneath them. Allies consult you last, not out of disrespect, but efficiency. And efficiency no longer includes your delays. You feel the strain of adaptation resisted too long, muscles stiff from holding positions meant to be temporary. New agreements reference you only indirectly. Footnotes where chapters once carried your name in bold. You notice how often reassurance replaces ambition, how survival language crowds out the promise of growth. Capital flows like water downhill, avoiding friction, and your barriers stand dry, tall, and increasingly irrelevant. You sense your narrative thinning, unable to explain sacrifices without clear victories to anchor belief. Even critics grow quiet, because opposition requires relevance, and silence suggests resolution elsewhere. You feel time accelerate selectively, slow when you need urgency, fast when you hope to pause consequences. The idea of leadership becomes symbolic, reduced to presence without influence, motion without traction. You attend summits where conversations continue politely around you, never quite including your weight. The cost of reversal now exceeds the cost of continuation, trapping you in side choices you once called freedom. You realize independence has quietly inverted, meaning self-reliance for others and isolation for you. Power fades not with confrontation, but with redistribution, spread so evenly it never gathers back. As the end approaches, you understand the world did not turn against you. It simply learned to move on. The final weeks arrive quietly, without crisis banners, and you sense how endings prefer discretion over spectacle. Your voice still carries, but it no longer moves rooms, echoing instead like a remembered anthem from another season. Decisions complete themselves elsewhere, and you receive updates the way one receives weather reports. Informative, unavoidable, impersonal. You speak of legacy, yet legacy now feels like a mirror angled backward, showing effort without changing direction. The systems you hardened learn to soften around you, bending until they slipped free of your grip entirely. What you called protection now reads as distance, and distance has become the measure by which others navigate safely. Markets settle into new habits, comfortable without your supervision, calm in a way that excludes your instructions. You notice relief in foreign voices, not hostility. Relief that adaptation no longer requires your consent. At home, the noise subsides into fatigue, anger replaced by resignation, the most reliable sign that momentum has left. You realize control was never seized from you. It was redistributed patiently until no single hand could reclaim it. Even supporters speak gently now, protecting you from sharper truths by softening their words. You review the journey and see how certainty narrowed vision, how insistence confused strength with permanence. The world did not punish you. It adjusted, the way bodies adjust to pain by learning new ways to move. You stand before the future like a closed gate, solid, intact, and entirely bypassed. Power once followed your outline. Now it traces other shapes, leaving you as a reference, not a route. You accept that relevance cannot be commanded, only earned daily, and missed days compound quietly. The narrative resolves without verdict, no gavel strike, only a soft closing of ledgers. You feel the weight lift slightly, replaced by the hollow calm of no longer being essential. In this calm, you understand the tragedy. Not defeat, but survival without direction. The story ends not with collapse, but with continuity. The world moving forward, having learned how to do so without you.